Right. Good morning. Good morning and welcome back. We're very excited to have you. Thank you for sticking with us for this entire week. It is the last day of our conference. Um, just want to remind all of our educators that if you would like credit for attending, please make sure that you put your name and or email address in the chat. And if you are having difficulties putting your name in the chat, you can email either myself or Kathleen Pate to let us know, and we will make sure to give you credit for what you've attended. Now, today we're going to do similar but different. StoryCorps is going to come and give us our presentation, um, but they are actually going to do a slightly longer presentation to tell you a little bit more about what they do. Um, so we will be listening to them first, and then after that, at 10, we will welcome Dr. Dara Byrne for our final presentation of the day. Let me bring Emily in.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's been so nice to spend the mornings with you all week. So hopefully, I assume that some of you have been here every morning as the conference has gone on. Maybe today is the day that you're joining. I'm going to take a little bit longer than we have throughout the week, this morning, but we'll start off the way that we have all week by sharing an animation from StoryCorps collection. And as you've heard me say, StoryCorps helps us see the humanity and possibility in us all, one story at a time. So we're sharing stories from our archive. And after this story, we're going to talk about how you can contribute your voice and your story to the growing library of our history using our free tools. Throughout the week, you have heard me say that we really highlight the voices of everyday people. So often they're folks that you have never heard of until that moment that we've shared it. And that's the same this morning, except we'll also hear about someone who you probably do recognize. Reverend Farrell Duncombe grew up in the 1950s in Montgomery, Alabama. Once a mischievous young boy, he eventually stepped into his father's shoes and became a pastor at his childhood church. At StoryCorps, he came and talked about the role models who inspired his path, including his Sunday school teacher, Miss Rosalie, known to the rest of the world and us as Rosa Parks. Joel, will you play the video that says role models?
Okay, I'm not sure which one that is. I see principal at Lanier High School. I see one that has a picture of two people. Is that the right one?
Yeah, this one. Oh, it's the sorry, everyone. It's the first one after my slides. It's the first one on mine. I see it says role models on it. It's an animation. Can you see that?
Don't see that.
I don't know what it looks like on your end. I'm like, how do I flash it? It's the first video I uploaded. Does that help?
Okay. All right.
After Sunday school, our group of guys would always go down to the grocery store. I would get an upper 10 drink and a po' boy. Well, I remember once I decided to take it back to church. And I started unraveling the po' boy. And you know, at that time they had cellophane paper. And it makes the loudest noise. And my mother looked from the choir stand that would take the wet out of water. And I pretended I didn't see her. My father was in the pulpit, and I had not noticed that he had stopped preaching. And next thing I know, he had come and he had me by my collar and took me right outside the church. And we didn't have air conditioning. The window was open, so you know everybody would be screaming and hollering out there. Of course, he went back and started preaching. But that taught me that I was being disrespectful, not only towards my father, but towards others, those who wanted to listen, those who wanted to learn. I gained a lot of food for growth because it was our privilege to have been taught by some outstanding people like Miss Rosa Parks, who was my Sunday school teacher. We always call her Miss Rosalie. Why we call her Miss Rosalie, I'll never know. But this is before the boycott. This is before the civil rights movement. This was just Miss Rosalie. And she called me Little Pharaoh. Later on, when I was principal at Lanier High School, and it so happened at the time that Mrs. Parks was coming back to commemorate the bus boycott. Well, I really wanted her to come to my school. So I talked with her on the phone. She said, Farrell, is you? I said, yes, ma'am, Miss Rosalie. You a principal? I said, yes, ma'am. Of a school? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, Lord, I'm so happy because I didn't think you were going to be nothing. You know, it's strange to get called out by the mother of civil rights. But at any rate, she agreed to come to my school, and I still have a picture on my desk now of us. That was a highlight of my life, to walk with her into that auditorium of Sidney Lanier High School, which was a traditional white school, and I, the principal, walk in with Rosa Parks on my arm. I went outside at one point because I had tears in my eyes as I reflected upon this lady and the significance of what she was doing. These are the people that nurtured me. These are the people who saw me when I was still Little Pharaoh. And now I'm their pastor. And to walk into the pulpit and to stand behind the desk where my daddy stood, it's an awesome feeling. So I'm just humble.
Great. Thanks for listening. So, as I said, we've been excited to connect with you all because all of the stories that we have been listening to as part of StoryCorps' archive, this large, vast collection of our history in our own words, is something that you also, wherever you are, can contribute to. You can add your story to become a part of that collection that others can search and find and listen to and learn from. Can you bring up, Joy, the slides? I will give everyone a little bit to look at. So of course, I'm excited to say you can share your story. And first, I'll give just a little bit more context of how the stories that we have been listening to this week have come to be. As we haven't gotten too deep into it, but StoryCorps is an independent nonprofit. We've been around for over 20 years, and our mission is to help us believe in each other by illuminating the humanity and possibility in us all, one story at a time. And we do that by providing people the opportunity to sit down face to face, to have conversations about what matters to them most. We archive them in our archive at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress and make that archive available and accessible online at archive.storycorps.org. And we take stories from that collection and find ways to bring them into the world so that we can listen to and learn from one another. So in the form of these animations that we've been sharing this week, in little audio clips that you can hear if you listen to National Public Radio on Friday mornings, or on social media and other places. We just try to bring these out into the world so that we can feel that connection and shared humanity and hear about our lives in our own voices. So those 20 years ago, we began actually by creating this soundproof recording booth in the middle of the hustle and bustle of Grand Central Terminal in New York City. You can imagine it's intense, it's stressful, everyone's moving around. And so we began in our sort of hometown in New York, inviting people in to share their stories. And they would sit down, as you see here, face to face across from one another to really have the conversation that you already know how to have. We have conversations with one another every day, the people in our lives, but we do not often take the time to actually step back and not be distracted by our phones, by multitasking, by all of the people and things in our lives, and really just sit face to face and ask questions about what's important to us, what we're most proud of, the moments that really defined our lives. our advice for future generations, how we might want to be remembered. And I actually invite you now to think, when was the last time I really did sit down face to face with someone, maybe even the person that you live with, that you sleep in a bed next to? But when was the last time you really just sat down without any of those other distractions? That's the experience that StoryCorps brings together. So when we built that original booth, that space to bring people together, Studs Terkel, sort of a patron saint of StoryCorps, an oral historian and author, he gave a speech and he said, "We know who the architect of Grand Central was, but who laid these floors, who built these walls? These are the voices you must celebrate through StoryCorps." And that's what we've been trying to do. Since then, you can find us, we've sort of, the model has been the same, but we have found ways to be across the country and really hear voices. We have a mobile recording booth. Inside that Airstream trailer, there's a recording booth, and we have a team that travels from town and city to city all around the country, has been doing that for almost 15 years. So you can kind of look out to see if it's coming near you soon. We're kind of in the Northeast this summer and coming up. You can keep an eye out for that. We also have a recording booth year round in Atlanta, Georgia. But then there's opportunities for us, as I'll talk about in a moment, for you to record just in your own home or in your own community and contribute to that collection. This is my little Library of Congress representation to just acknowledge that part of the power of this is that people have the opportunity to preserve these stories for future generations so that we can listen to them, we can access them in the future. And of course, just a whole collection of stories. If you go to storycorps.org, all of these short pieces that we've been sharing, when you want to hear that little clip, you can go there to find more of those in audio, in animation, etc. For teachers who might be here today, I really encourage you to go there, to explore stories, to find what you can, because they're just a great 3-minute supplement to your classroom, just to find first-person narrative to support what you're doing. So let's actually, I'm mindful of the time, but I want to play another story for us really quickly. And Joy, I'm going to introduce it first, but it's this one where you see the picture of a man and a woman standing next to one another. That's the one that we'll do. And this is going to be Eli Brown and Natalie Adams. They met in 3rd grade when their school in Winsboro, Louisiana first integrated. The two of them were top students, so their lives were academically intertwined through elementary school and high school, yet deeply separate. So they were attending a school that integrated after 1969 Alexander v. Holmes case. So Adams and Brown, they would go on to become co-valedictorians of their high school in the class of 1980. Today, Brown is an OBGYN in Alabama, and Adams is a professor at the University of Alabama. But they sat down together to remember going to school together, integrating for the first time. It looks like maybe that, is it not working, Joy? It looks like maybe that one didn't work.
Yeah, it's playing, but there's nothing happening. Like it's showing that it's playing, but nothing's happening.
Okay, we'll skip it for now. I just always want to share more and more stories. So we'll skip it for now and go back to the slides so that I can show you how you can again contribute. The first thing I just wanted to to make a note of here at StoryCorps, when we have these conversations, sometimes you hear us talk about it like oral history, or, maybe recorded memory and personal stories. We differ from sort of a traditional oral history. We differ from traditional journalism or media, in that it really is this model, again, of two people coming together. And those ingredients are that it is an intentional time and space. People have been really thoughtful about what conversation they might have for 40 minutes, making sure to be a really welcoming space for one another, comfortable space, and taking that time and thought about what they'd like to be curious about one another. It's conversational. It's really brought on by two people having a conversation. This week, we've been hearing a lot of stories where we've the way that we've edited that story to share with you, we often are just hearing one voice, but those come from these conversations where two people are really remembering together or asking one another questions. And the final is that it's participant led. When folks come to StoryCorps, we don't tell them what to talk about, or what topics are important to them. We invite them to think about that time and ask each other questions about what they would like to. We have question lists that you can look at as inspiration and choose. But that space is yours to use that time to record and preserve the conversation that matters to you. So we're really excited that a number of years ago, we really democratized this process. StoryCorps can't be everywhere. So we took our archive, and instead of it being only accessible at the Library of Congress, we brought it online at archive.storycorps.org. So you can go there and search and listen to unedited interviews in their full form. So I really encourage you to do that. And when we did that, we also created the opportunity to be able to share your story from where you are. So I'm just going to very quickly walk through the steps to what that looks like, and then maybe we can have some time to answer questions. But the first step is to create a free account in our archive at archive.storycorps.org, or by downloading our app. That app essentially takes your smartphone and turns it into your recording device. It walks you through the whole process of recording by helping you choose questions that you might want to ask, by timing that for you, and walking you through the process of archiving your own interview in our archive. And here, just a reminder that you can browse that entire collection at archive.storycorps.org. A little note is we like everyone to be really thoughtful and mindful of sharing your information and being thoughtful about how you want to do that. When you make an account, you agree to terms of use, that you would be age 13 or older, and sort of, if you're a minor, with the consent of a parent or guardian, that you're uploading content that you have the right and consent to share. So you're not uploading Taylor Swift recordings or something to our archive, but it's something that you have recorded, and you have the permissions to share from your interview partner. And you retain those rights to those recordings. Those are yours, but by sharing them with StoryCorps, you also give us that license to use as part of our collection, to steward it in our archive, and give people access to it. So once you've done that, you want to think about and choose someone that you are curious about, or who you'd like to get to know better, or you'd like to share memories with. So you can kind of just think about that. Is there someone in your life who maybe you know that their stories, but you haven't really asked them about them? Or is there someone you'd like to share your stories with, and make sure that you can pass on those memories? You'll prepare your questions. Again, be really intentional about how do you want to use the time together. What are the questions that you have that you're curious about? You might talk with your conversation partner about things you don't want to talk about during your conversation. But typically at StoryCorps, we recommend having around a 30 to 45-minute conversation to begin, to give yourselves the opportunity to have a chance to warm up and get deeper into your conversation without getting too tired. So that's a good time to focus on. None of our lives, we cannot fill any one of our lives into that time period. So it's really helpful to be intentional about what questions you'd like to ask, which part of someone's life, what are you really curious about? Next, you'll choose your technology. So just a really quick note, I just mentioned the StoryCorps app, which you can download to your smartphone in any app store. But in the pandemic, we really adapted very quickly and built a platform within our archive called StoryCorps Connect that allows you to connect via the web platform, similar to what we're doing right now, and record the audio part of your conversation that way. So that way you can send an invitation right from the site to someone who will join you, and you can record your conversation, whether you're rooms apart, miles apart. So you do not have to be in the same room in order to have that experience together. Next, you'll make sure that you have a quiet, comfortable space. I always say, think about you want to be very comfortable and feel relaxed. And also, if you imagine a gymnasium, imagine the opposite of that, of the kind of space you would want to create to help you have really good audio quality in your conversation. I don't know if you can hear it today. I certainly can, but there is a great amount of yard work or construction happening in my neighborhood behind my apartment building. And so I can hear a lot of those noises. So if I were recording that conversation, I would want to move into a quieter space away from those windows, or during a time when I know that sound is not going to be happening at the same time. Finally, record your conversation together. If you're using the app, again, it will just walk you through that. You'll press record and it will give you kind of a countdown timer. And you just want to use this opportunity to just be curious and ask questions. This is not a media interview. We're not live on a stage. All of us have conversations every day with the people in our lives. And the beauty of these conversations is that you sound exactly as you are. So of course, sometimes that means we forget things, we repeat things, we say, we might interrupt one another. And that's just all part of the conversation. So I invite you to just think of it almost as if you're just sitting down and having coffee or tea together, and having the conversation that you'd like to have. When you're finished, this is one of my favorite parts, because this technology allows all of you to participate in the archival process and be a part of that with us. Our archivists, they always say metadata is a love letter to the future. This is how in the future people will be able to connect and find the recording that you have. And so the app or the archive will just walk you through the steps to give a very quick summary of your conversation, and add some keywords to help people find that conversation in the future. And you can also take a selfie or add a photo to that so that people have a face to match with your voice. Finally, when you share your conversation, you're also able to set some privacy settings, just to determine how you'd like people to be able to access your interview. You can change that at any time. You can go back and change it, but you could make that available to anyone who might be searching the internet, all the way down to this is private and I'm the only one who will be able to view and access it, and just share sort of a special link with people I'd like to see it with. In all cases, if you're sharing it with StoryCorps, it is kind of a part of our cloud. So we would be able to see it, but those privacy settings really are controlling the access that other people in the public would have to it. And then finally, you click the button and your interview becomes a part of StoryCorps' archive, becomes a part of that collection. So I invite you to do that. The home of your interview is there in your account, in your app or online in the archive. So you can come back to it again and again. You can share that with others. And I hope that you stay there and spend some time just exploring the archive, because as I have mentioned earlier this week, there are hundreds of thousands of voices in there from all across the country. in urban spaces, rural spaces, people of all identities, ages, experiences. And I think there's such treasures in there that even we maybe haven't even heard yet, because everyone is really putting forth that effort. I know that it's time. We have a presentation coming up as well. I just want to give the opportunity, if maybe there's one or two questions. I know there's a number of educators in the room also. So I want us to give a big hello, and invite any of you. If you want, I'd love to connect you with more of our resources or hear how you might use StoryCorps stories or StoryCorps interview style in your classroom. You can always connect to me at learning@storycorps.org. So even if I know we have limited time today, so if there are questions that are coming up or thoughts, and we don't get to them today, you can just reach out at learning@storycorps.org, and I will receive that and respond to you and share more resources or hear what's happening in your classrooms.
All right. Thank you so much, Emily. I'm asking the Clinton Presidential Library if you guys have any questions for Emily about StoryCorps, and also I'm checking online as well. I don't see any questions online, but just want to make sure. If you have questions, Clinton, I can't unmute you.
I know that was a little bit of a rapid fire introduction, but
no, it was great. This actually sounds awesome. I feel like I'm gonna look at some of my family members and get their stories recorded.
Yeah,
okay,
I've done this with a lot of folks in my family and both of my parents several times. And not to sort of always feels a little sad to say this, but my father died several years ago, and I was so grateful that I had several recordings where we had talked about different times in his life, and so that was such a gift just to have his voice, and then also to be able to share that with my nieces and nephews, who maybe hadn't gotten the chance quite yet to ask the questions. Now they're older and they might say, oh, I have questions I wish I could ask him. So I'm glad that I have that to share with them.
Well, this is awesome. I hope that the educators take advantage of the resources and learn, and even possibly teach their students about oral histories and things like that. So thank you so much, Emily, for being with us all week long, for sharing all these wonderful stories, and for this presentation. I am going to say goodbye to you. And then for everyone else, we're going to take a short break as we bring in Dr. Byrne, but also because Clinton is having some technical difficulties. So we're going to try to figure that out. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will welcome Dr. Byrne. Bye, Emily. Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Byrne.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Please call me Dara.
Okay. Well, good morning, Dara. I'm Joy. I'm the specialist at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. Now, they actually can still hear us online because we're still live, even though we're on break. But
Sure.
I did want to check and make sure, this is working and looks fine. Do you want me to advance the slides, or do you want to do it? I'm fine with you.
I can advance them. The one thing I couldn't figure out, so in scroll through, this is actually a video. And so I was playing with it this morning, and I think at this point, what might make sense is at that point to just share that way. Were
That
you
works
able to
too.
see that?
Yes, I can see where you added the video, so that works too.
Okay.
Just let me know, and I will add it to the stream and play it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. It's short.
Okay.
It's very short.
And so I'm going to take myself out of the stream once you start your presentation, but I can still do all the behind the scenes stuff. So you may see, like, if I want them to make sure they can see your slides a little closer, you may see the layout change a little bit. And
Okay.
it's just me trying to make sure that, everything gets seen. So there are all kinds of
Thank
layouts,
you.
and I like to have fun playing with them.
Yes,
So,
please do. I am very comfortable advancing the slides.
okay.
Play around. I went through about 4 tutorials last night to learn StreamYard so that I could I could be a little more fluent with it, but your expertise is very much appreciated and welcomed. Style it up, however.
Okay. This is probably the fun part of presenting for when we do things like this is I get to play with all the layouts.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, all right, let me just check and make sure Clinton is ready. Are you guys good? Okay, I think that's a thumbs up. You're a little far away, but I think. All right. So I'm going to take them back out of the stream so that they won't disturb you. But when the Q&A starts, I'll bring them in because they'll ask you
Oh,
live.
perfect.
And I'll
Oh,
monitor
so
the
I
chat.
won't be able to see them.
Once I add them to the stage, you will. So you should be able to see them now.
Yes.
Yes. So during your presentation, though, I'm going to take them out of the stage. So
Perfect.
I will be out as well. So for your presentation, you'll just see you and your slides. Once we get to the Q&A portion, then I'll bring them back into the stream, so they'll be able to ask you their questions live. And then I'll monitor the chat, and if there are questions in the chat, then I'll ask you those as well.
Perfect.
Okay. All righty. Where is my? Oh. It's Macaulay College, right? Is that how you say it? Macaulay?
Macaulay Honors College, yes.
Okay. All right. Give them about one more minute, and then I'll introduce you and turn it over to you.
Sure.
All right, welcome back. We are excited to welcome Dr. Dara Byrne to our conference and for our final presentation of the day, or of the conference rather. We are just excited. We're to hear from her. We're excited that you all have stuck with us for an entire week. And she's going to talk to us about the unfinished agenda of Brown v. Board. So welcome, Dr. Byrne.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Oh,
okay,
yes,
perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity to contribute to the exciting conversation that you've all been having for this week on Brown at 70. I'm especially grateful because the libraries and the National Archives hold a very special place for me. 20 years ago, when this book came together, many of the people who were involved, like Derek Bell, Charles Ogletree, Bill Cox, were very adamant about making sure that we represented the documentary history. And I was particularly honored to get the opportunity to work with Khalil Chisholm, who was at the National Archives in DC and then went to the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library after that. Khalil has since passed away in 2016, along with several other contributors to the book, like Charles Ogletree, who passed away in 2023, Derek Bell, who passed away in 2011, and also Bill Cox, who was the co-founder of Diverse Issues in Higher Education. At the time, it was Black Issues in Higher Ed. He passed away in 2022. And in fact, as I was preparing for this presentation, when I looked through the book, which I haven't touched in quite a while, I was so thrilled to see Dr. Cox's story about his experience growing up in segregated schools in Alabama, alongside Khalil Chisholm's documentary history, looking at the actual records that are available at the National Archives on Brown. And so it really gives me such a great pleasure to be here today to represent their work, but especially in front of you all. So I'm going to just switch to the presentation, which for this, since we have a short period of time together, and I am an academic, so I'll let you know that I can talk for a really long time, I really wanted to just focus on 4 core issues, particularly because I'm a lifelong educator, and I know that many in the audience are educators or librarians and work with young learners on their journey. It's really important that in all of these matters, as the history of Brown teaches us, educators must be at the table in every step of the way. So we're going to spend some time looking back and looking forward, going through some of the lessons learned, as well as I want to introduce you to some tools that you might not be aware of yet that really tells a great story about school segregation using the data that's available today, made available to the public, as well as some closing thoughts about what it means to educate for a more just society. But before we begin, I wanted to just take a moment to reflect on some of the words of Thurgood Marshall himself. In fact, the year before he passed away, he died in 1993. In 1992, he received the Liberty Award and gave what could very well be described as the final sort of rousing speech, which crystallized his sort of perspectives, and I think will help to frame our conversation today. What he talked about was that it's really important for us to create a society where we are free from fear, hate, and rage in order to allow democracy, liberty, and justice to truly thrive. He also states that Americans must get to work. So while you've been doing this conference, and certainly my closing conversation is really going to be about the work that we're all engaged in together, and that we should think of this as a call to action. Because in order to achieve a flourishing democracy, true liberty, real justice does require the effort and active participation of everyone. And I think in many ways that speaks to what the broad goal of Brown is, the education and active participation of all citizens. And it's a reminder to all of us, as we see in Thurgood Marshall's words, that these ideals do not happen automatically. They require the constant work and vigilance of each and every one of us. I want to share with you a little bit about who I am and how this work and my sort of perspective on educating for justice comes to be. So what you're looking at here could very well represent the students that I worked with for 20 years at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is actually the only college in the country that is focused entirely on justice issues. John Jay is where I worked in 2003 when I got the opportunity to collaborate on the unfinished agenda of Brown versus Board. So what you're seeing on the left and the right represents the kind of broad picture of how John Jay students might think about justice, ranging from activist involvement all the way through to uniformed service. And so in 2003, when I was a new professor, thinking about this first publication coming out of graduate school, all I remembered at the time thinking was, how would my students really understand and connect with the civil rights movement? And particularly a landmark case like Brown versus Board, which had shaped so much of their lives, but they might not have been clear on many of the details. To be really sure you understand, I am not a legal scholar and don't pretend to be, and I think that's one of the things that we really have to take into consideration when framing the work of Brown. It's actually not about uh, a legal work. It's not about education, and it's also not about activist involvement. It's actually a cross section of all of these. And so the work that we try to put together here is intended to take anyone, truly anyone, speaking to this idea that we are all needed in this work of thinking about how we educate for a more just and inclusive society. But we also worked on including voices from the era, a lot of the kinds of people who lived through segregation, um, in order to strike at the balance of the national and local kinds of tensions around Brown, particularly desegregation and resegregation, as we're going to speak about a little bit today. I took these in preparation for you guys as a sort of ripped from the headlines kind of view of what 70 years of Brown looks like. It's not lost on anyone that we are in a moment of significant backlash around efforts to build a more diverse and inclusive school systems using public funding. Lots of questions around school choice, how it is that families of all education, of all income backgrounds, get access to high quality education. But that isn't supposed to set us up for thinking that there isn't 70 years worth of impact on Brown. And so I want to make sure that we always point to some of the great achievements. Of course, the legal matters are there. I mean, as I'm sure you've discussed throughout the week, the work that Brown has done, despite all of the efforts to roll back many of the goals of Brown, legally ended the doctrine of separate but equal. But over the 70 years, what we've seen are increased enrollment rates, particularly from students of minority backgrounds, including increased graduation rates. This is something that I've spent the last 22 years of my career really working on, how it is we drive up the enrollment and graduation rates for those who have the least access to quality education. But we're also not to miss the importance of celebrating the diversity of the curriculum as it is today. You know, I have a daughter that is in middle school, and I'm always just so stunned by the things that she is working on with her teachers that represent a broad range of learning, stretching across backgrounds and cultures in the US, diverse experiences that would have been unheard of, certainly in the 1900s when I was in middle school. Um, we're also seeing that despite what a lot of the research has shown in terms of the impact of removing the access of Black teachers who were working with Black students prior to desegregation and the loss of them in the teaching workforce, we are still seeing some great achievements over the last 70 years in the diversity of leadership, particularly in administration, principals, administrators in higher education, and so on, that are contributing to a more inclusive and representative environment. Something that is very near and dear to my heart is the representation that we are seeing in academic research. From every discipline, you can find a lot of informed scholarship that helps us to think about policies and best practices that really would not have been there 70 years ago. And that has also contributed to a greater public awareness of these questions around the relationship between racial diversity and outcomes in our public school systems. Uh, it's really something quite special to look back on some of the footage of the protest against desegregation as young children were walking to schools with armed guards, and to see how far we've come in 70 years with a general awareness of how important it is to create nurturing environments for all students. We saw over the pandemic, certainly, that there's been a lot of achievement in by way of access to technology. Now, this is going to be a really important one to mention, because when we move over to thinking about what actually is the unfinished agenda, much like what you'll find in the book that we published 20 years ago, many of the things that you would describe as significant impacts or benefits of Brown, you can also look at as the unfinished agenda, the work that still needs to be done. Certainly, the resegregation trends that worry many of us, I'm sure worry many of us in the audience today. Despite the promise of Brown, most of our schools, including the school systems in New York that I work in, remain deeply and disturbingly segregated by race and socioeconomic status. And this resegregation often results, as I'm sure many of you are aware, in significant disparities in resources, facilities, educational outcomes, especially when we look at disparities between Black and white students. As you all know, funding for public schools relies heavily on local property taxes, which continues to have significant inequalities. Schools in affluent areas tend to have more resources than schools in poorer communities. And, you know, when I think about the time of putting together this book, and to see that 20 years later, all of these items, except maybe charter schools and school choice, continue to be the top 8 issues that we are still debating and discussing, even though right now it does seem like a particular lightning rod moment. But all of these items were very much on the table when we were looking back at the 50th anniversary. It's important to note that while there are several debates about whether case studies like the 5 that I've listed here were effective or not, some of the strategies that have been used continue to be those that were particularly beneficial in moving the needle. In fact, there was I wish I could see some of you, but I'm not sure if you're aware of the report that came out at the tail end of May from Stanford and USC that shows that racial and economic segregation among schools has grown steadily in the largest school districts in the last 3 decades. And what they're pointing to is that it's not necessarily a failure of the strategies that I'm listing on the left, like busing, magnet schools, controlled choice, socioeconomic based assignments that tended to be popular over quite a few decades. It's actually driven in part by policies favoring school choice over integration. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because they go through data dating back to about 1967. And they found that while segregation between white and Black students increased by 64, segregation between Black and white students had been progressing. By 1988, there was a 64% increase in the segregation in the 100 largest school districts, and that segregation by economic status has increased by 50% since 1991. So you might be wondering what specifically happened in that period of time that made such a striking difference. Well, I want to show you this. If you are familiar with this, I wish I could see you so you could let me know. But I am so excited about, of all things, the Segregation Explorer. And to say that I'm excited about a Segregation Explorer is a very funny thing to utter. But this was put out by Stanford and USC. It's a searchable data. It's a searchable database on racial and economic school segregation from 1991 to 2022. And what they are arguing is that it's policy changes, not demographic changes, that are driving the increase that they are finding in the research. And why does this matter? Well, policy changes such as the reduction of monitoring of school districts at the federal and state level, that's a policy choice, right? And what they're finding is that decisions like that ushered in this sort of increase, and as well as decisions like favoring charter schools or school choice pushed us faster into a resegregation era in a very short period of time. So it's not actually 70 years of resegregation that this data takes you through. And this is important because there's a tendency to attribute segregation in schools to segregation in neighborhoods. This was argued by one of the professors associated with this project, Dr. Ann Owens, who works on public policy at USC, in pointing to the fact that the story is a little bit more complicated than that. I'm not sure how many of you have ever spent time on the website Our World in Data. It's one of my favorite places to go. In fact, if you on a separate matter, if you want to look at Our World in Technology, so on that website, look that up and you'll see an interesting timeline of what the US and world engagement with technology has looked like. You can do the same thing with artificial intelligence. But in this picture, here, what you're actually looking at is a long timeline of decision making globally. Public funding is informed by policy choices, and there is no other issue that is more important for students like mine who have spent their time in public education since they started school all the way through to the final degree that they are going to earn. There is no more important thing for them to understand than the relationship between policy and public funding. Here's what it looks like at the US level alone. And I want you to take a look here closely at where the public funding starts to dip. Right? You see a steady increase, and this is important in terms of understanding desegregation and resegregation trends and how it ties to investments in public schools. So when you start to look at the story in this kind of way, it's the questions of where we sit, what decisions we're making, start to take on a different kind of picture. And I think as people who are at the intersection between legal matters, educational matters, cultural matters, local and national, drawing on the data made visual helps to cut through some of the issues that might otherwise be murky. I'm going to take you a little closer. And this is back to the Segregation Explorer. What you're looking at here is Bridgeport, Connecticut, the metro area of Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I'm pulling out the data from 2 schools. Where you're able to see funding differences that play out very differently for students in poor schools and students in wealthy schools. So the city's local tax rate in Bridgeport is more than 4 times higher than the rate in Greenwich, Connecticut. And just about everybody knows Greenwich, Connecticut, and what Greenwich, Connecticut life must be like. It's a very affluent suburb that still produces more per pupil funding, largely because of property values. So when you look here at the data, what you're able to see is on the left-hand side, the statistics, the data around school integration. On the right-hand side, you're looking at a school in Greenwich, Connecticut. But what's interesting when you cross this with the public funding data, wealthy districts in the Bridgeport area, such as Greenwich, will raise an average of about $24,900 per pupil in local revenue. And what's interesting about this is that this is going to be about $18,325 more than Bridgeport, like one of the schools on the left, which is in a poorer part of that district. So the additional almost $7,000 that a low-income district is going to receive from the state is only going to go but so far. And those of you who are educators know this. So even after the funding that the state kicks in, the school on the right in that district is going to generate $11,548 more per student than the school on the left. It's otherwise hard to understand that just by reading the literature alone. And one of the things that I'm just so excited about where we are today in terms of the kind of research that's available, the technology that's available, the access that we have, is that as someone in the classroom who spent her career in the classroom and that continues to make education decisions for my students, I'm able to leverage tools like this, information like this, and put it directly into the hands of my students so that they can see it and they can understand it. The longtime president of the Faculty Senate at John Jay College, where I work and I'm still a faculty member of, once said to me, "The success of our students depends on the success of the faculty who teach them." That statement still resonates with me. The success of our students depends on those who teach them. Ensuring that all schools, regardless of their demographic composition, have access to adequate resources and high quality teachers is crucial. There is no possibility of educational equity without this. But what you do with your students is truly at the heart of the unfinished agenda. So some of the key lessons that I think of when we go through the literature, when I looked back at what we put together in the unfinished agenda of Brown, when I look at what has happened in the 20 years since, there's still some key lessons that are important to instill, not just in our conversations, but in the work that we do in our classrooms, the way that we organize our materials in the libraries, and the way that we position learning and discovery in front of our students, regardless of whether they are in Bridgeport, Connecticut, or they're in Greenwich, Connecticut. And some of these key lessons include what it means to have a sustained commitment to this kind of work. It's 70 years, and it's not time to get tired. It really does take sustained commitment to move the needle. But also with the thought of what sustainability looks like. We know that when busing efforts got rolled back, it was largely out of frustration, challenges with how to turn a vision or a concept into a sustained plan without ongoing funding to make that possible. Um, but also helping our learners understand what the means are of addressing socioeconomic factors. Many of our students, certainly the students that I work with, are always asking about what the strategies are for ensuring equitable resource distribution. And of course, exploring more of what the best practices are for implementing holistic approaches to school improvement. These are the kinds of things that provide rich conversations in our classrooms. I'm giving you 3 examples of the ways that I think in our environment today, educators and librarians can really work with young people and each other in sort of thinking about where our learning and our curriculum kind of fits with this. Uh, I gave you a short example of how I would use data analyses to engage my students. Um, there's so much rich work to be done in helping our young people leverage data insights to be more informed about policy decisions. Um, I've been working with this nonprofit group called Civic Synergy that has been helping us to figure out how to bring young people together to understand more about policy. I think sometimes we teach these topics like Brown versus Board or Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. We teach these things as historical matters, not as present day influential issues that we need to be thinking about. And one of the ways to do that is to help them to understand policy, to do deep diving, but also to play a role in writing policies or thinking about how they would change a policy and present it either to local or elected officials and things like that. Role playing and debates are, I think, an awesome way of getting students to work together, but to also learn to really hear each other. As I'm sure you're all aware, we have a lot of work to do in getting young people, much like those of our age, to who have differing perspectives, to really hear each other, to and to listen with empathy and to listen with care. I also find that case study analyses work really well in the classroom for deep diving and putting examples in the hands of students to closely understand the differences between the strategies that are being used and the outcomes that were generated. In the case studies that I presented earlier, those 4 strategies, every single one of them worked to some extent. And what we learn from examining them is that there is no one magic bullet. It depends on the effect that you're trying to have, but in all cases, if racial if desegregating by race is the goal, that does need to be the intentional effort and sustained over a rather long period of time. One of the things that there are actually 2 things that I wanted to share with you that we're doing at my institution to continue the work of thinking about justice and equity. What I am really finding has been effective with helping our young people not only learn, but to teach each other is to engage them with data storytelling skills. One of the growing areas in our increasingly digital world in terms of just workforce development, but also critical thinking skills, is data visualization, how to make sense of what the data stories are telling. I mentioned earlier that when you're looking at the picture of public funding in the US, it's actually not a story just of data, it's a story of decision making, of policies. And so when we equip our students with these kinds of skills, it empowers them to make sense of what some of the facts are, instead of just relying on particular interpretations, some of which are fraught on whether Brown was impactful or ineffective. The other thing that we've been doing, and this I will have to share this. It's going to be a video that I'm going to play for just a couple of minutes, is bringing young people together across the country. One of the things that we have been finding in our work in New York City is that many of our students really don't have a sense of how particular issues play out in different parts of the country. And this is something that is particularly troublesome because we do need a sort of a shared sense of how these issues play out across the nation at a national level and especially at a local level. And so in partnership with 3 other honors colleges, Arizona State University's Honors College, Central Arkansas Honors College, and Pittsburgh's Honors College, we created the Justice and Equity Honors Network to bring our students together, looking at justice issues, including education, learning about the differing perspectives, and working together to synthesize. Collaboration is key to sustained efforts to make sure that we are all focused on a free and just society. I'm going to share with you just a little bit of this video so you can get a sense of what the experience was like for students who know very little about the lived experience of students in the South or in the West and other regions of the country. Is it playing?
It is not playing.
Sorry about this.
It's up, so you should just be able to press
Yeah.
play.
GEN is a multiple college initiative to bring honor students together to learn, analyze, critique literature and worldly happenings about social justice, racial justice, and get our students to start thinking about how we might contribute positively to that world.
So we basically take 2 courses centered on justice and equity, in addition to our normal course load, and then we have online weekly synthesis sessions where we get to work with students from across the country.
It's really easy to feel alone when you're fighting for issues of social justice. Having this network has really shown me that there are people who want to fight this fight with me.
I think GEN has prepared me to address challenges surrounding justice and equity by simply educating me.
Byrne, whatever you did, we lost the screen.
Theorists and philosophers who have spoken on this, especially works by like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks have been prominent pieces of work that we've studied. And before this class, I didn't have much knowledge on those people.
Learned a lot, for example, about how Indigenous communities were affected by a boarding school system that I hadn't really heard of before. It just opened my eyes to new issues.
Expanded my idea of what justice is and what equity is and how we can fight to bring about justice and bring about equity for the people who need it.
Being able to take a Zoom class with students from a whole other state on the completely other side of the country has really genuinely been a treat. So to hear from my Arizona State peers about what they are going through and how they perceive these issues and what their perspectives may be and what perhaps their government and their state officials may be saying about these different things creates a diverse perspective about exactly what justice and equity is, not only within New York or Arizona, but as a whole in the United States.
This program is doing amazing work and connecting different communities from across the country that experience similar and also different issues has been the experience of a lifetime. Getting to present work at this summer gathering is also phenomenal. Being in DC while the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade was a historical moment that I think will always stick with me. I feel lucky to have been here to really feel those emotions and to be in the nation's capital and understand how serious this really is.
It's a program that gets you to think about yourself, most importantly, and your place in the world. Jen really pushes you to think about who you are, the effects of what you say, who you talk to, your network, because in the long run, I believe that the change starts with you, and by you allowing yourself to learn more about these issues, you're not only making the world better for future generations, you're making your own life open to other possibilities and helping everybody you come across with.
Okay. Whoop. Thank you. And so I hope with what you see represented in that video is the effort to bring students to leverage a lot of these materials to bring students out of a disconnected experience that they're currently having with the sort of bigger picture, and particularly their role in it. And part of the reason that I think this is so meaningful, I think you'll see if we go back to the words of Thurgood Marshall in his final speech when he received the Liberty Award, he emphasizes that the limitations of the legal system in achieving true social progress and reconciliation. While the legal system can enforce laws, dismantle discriminatory practices, and provide justice in specific cases, it alone cannot create understanding, cooperation, and harmony among people. It cannot address the underlying social and personal dynamics that contribute to division and conflict. Marshall's message helps to underscore, I think, the importance of personal and collective effort in achieving a truly just and harmonious society. It complements the work of the legal system. And like Marshall, I do believe that in the work that I've been doing for the last 20 years, it is about calling on individuals and communities, especially our educators, our librarians, to be rather fearless in the work of fostering relationships, understanding, and unity. And finally, as I close, building bridges between different groups of people requires personal effort, a sustained effort, empathy, dialogue, and collaboration. These are the types of things that we're trying to instill in our public school students. And these all go beyond the legal mandates and strike directly at what is at the heart of the work that we do in any classroom, in any library, and especially what is needed in our curriculum. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. I am going to bring the Clinton Presidential Library into the stream so they can ask you their questions live. If you are online and you have a question, you can enter it in the chat. If you, for some reason, can't use the chat, you can always email me the question, and I'll put my email address down in the chat for you. So, Clinton, you are in the stream.
Hi, Dr. Byrne. This is Brian Schwigger in Little Rock. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So we're about 30 minutes away from the University of Central Arkansas. And that was great to see that they're involved. So can you talk more maybe about how we as kind of Arkansas educators can maybe direct students who might be going to college at UCA or maybe students in that community towards a program like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. I think this effort was born out of a response that that our institutions needed to do for students who were very restless about this sort of unanswered question of how do I actually make a difference? Because I think, as we all know, when you're reading the news, watching the news, you're seeing and hearing a lot of things that seem as though they are closed off to the everyday person. And working on this sort of no blame approach to civics, being engaged in the matters around you was the first thing that we wanted to do. And in particular, to build a network across the country. As I mentioned before, it's pretty striking when working with college students how interested they are in making a difference, but don't necessarily understand the long history and the present sort of policy issues, funding issues, and things of that nature. And so I would say that for any student that is interested in getting involved, especially since you're so close to Central Arkansas, I would recommend the first thing is to reach out to the school, these programs, invite them in to do presentations and conversations with targeted students in schools. I have been amazed in my 20 something years of doing this, how some students arrive to us already with the perception that they are not good enough for immersive programs or special experiences and opportunities, and that they will get turned away. And so the first thing that you can do is partner with your colleges and universities to dismantle the idea that a collaborative experience, a group experience, a special opportunity is intended for someone other than the students who might be coming out of lesser funded schools, who have spent at least 15 years with the impression that if there are resources present, it is not really intended for them. So that would be my recommendation to you.
If she could just repeat that once more, dismantle the idea that what?
Can you repeat that phrase, Dr. Byrne, about dismantling the idea that resources?
So I'm a little bit like a Baptist preacher. It comes out and then I can't remember what I said, but it was along the lines of just saying that one of the things that we find with our students who are coming from lesser resourced schools is that public schools is that they have in mind that when there are special experiences or opportunities, especially those where funding is attached. So honors programs tend to have tuition scholarships and other special things that it is not intended for them, because they've gotten the message early in their learning experience that high quality and heavy resources is for someone else. Our program, like Jen, is we do all of the fundraising, we cover all of the costs so that it is not of a burden for students, but it still requires a lot of work to drive home to them that any student belongs in this experience if they're asking these questions about the role that they can play in making a difference. So we do need a lot of help and support in how to dismantle or disrupt that idea of who belongs in these sort of wonderful mentoring and nurturing opportunities.
Thank you. Any other questions from us in the room? Yes, Ms. Wanda. We got another question, Dr. Byrne, coming.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Byrne. It's a lot to unpack, so it was a lot of things that you said that I really wanted to, talk to you about, but I need to fly to New York and get you face to face. But anyway,
I'm here. Call me.
But I work at a school where we have lots of national merit kids. We have kids that make perfect scores on their standardized test scores, and they go to some of the most selective schools in the United States. But my African American kids, this is my 8th year at this particular school. I've had one African American child that wasn't a perfect score, but it was a really good score, got into a selective school. But I haven't had any others, and that's what we're trying to do, really work with our kids and let them know, because they're brilliant kids, but trying to get them prepared too. And I remember one of my students that was in one of the AP classes, and brilliant young man came to me and said he wanted to get out of the class. And I said, well, I'm not going to take you out because you have the ability to do the class, and everything traditionally, all your grades show that you should be. And so he said, well, you're going to talk to my mom. I said, well, if your mother calls me, I will tell her, but I'm sure she wants you to be in there too. But then I delved into it and asked him, I said, tell me the reason you want to get out. And what he said that he was the only African American child in the class. And when they got ready to do collaborative activities, he was excluded. Say the kids would tell him, well, we'll do it and then we'll just put your name on it. Yeah. And I said, well, does the teacher know this? But anyway, we talked to the teacher and got that. But the main thing is, I need just an idea on what can we do to really work with our African American kids. Because I tell them, you have to do work beyond the classroom, and that's studying and looking at resources and preparing yourself. But what kind of things can be ideas that you have for that, so they can be prepared and competitive?
Yeah. So you are asking a whole conversation in one shot. There are a lot of really good resources that Brian, if you don't mind, I could send a couple of links to some resources to help with that for anybody who might be interested. But um, um, some of the literature really talks about the ways of having a holistic care and holistic environments to nurture students that have been historically disenfranchised, or I should say, more succinctly, had terrifying experiences in the school systems. And so for the question that you're asking, I'd really be interested in knowing a little bit more about what you mean about working with African American students, particularly in terms of the resources that are available, the goals that you and the school have in mind. So sometimes I hear about an educator that is working in an environment where they're not getting the resources or the administrative support that they need, and they're trying to go it on their own, or that there are a group of educators and a supportive administration, but not enough resources to do the types of things that they would like to do. Both of those are they're similar in that they represent a sort of an inequity in being able to develop the kinds of innovative programs or initiatives that you might want to do that in another context with appropriate support and resources, you could make happen very easily. So I'd love to know a little bit more, because sometimes the question being asked is actually one about the support and the resources that are available in order to achieve these things. In higher ed, for example, when I was the associate provost at John Jay College, the 4-year graduation rate was 25% when I started, and by the time I left, it moved up to 41%. So it was a 16% difference in 5 to 6 years, particularly in the graduation rates of low-income Black and Hispanic students. What happened there was actually support from the administration, but also a lot of philanthropic investments to help me bridge the gap. There is no way to move some of these things without having both of those pieces together. So I would love to give you some resources and some materials and literature, and I'm happy to do that with Brian, but it's always going to come back to these two things. Tell me a little bit about the environment that you're in. Do you have strong support for what you want to do? And what are the resources that you have available in order to do that? Because I find too often that many of our wonderful teachers are trying to move a boulder by themselves, and that's tough.
We have resources that are available, lots of them. We have not just the materials, but we have the person resources. But I guess I'm trying to see how to really get that motivation. I know a lot of that's intrinsic, but really stimulate that mentally for our African American kids, so that they would know I can do this. I'm as good as anybody that's in here. My brain is, but just really trying to get them motivated to want to go beyond the classroom to do what they need to do.
Amazing. I will send you some things.
Any other questions in the room?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Byrne, mention your book again.
Yes, it's called The Unfinished Agenda of Brown versus Board of Education, and it is part of the Landmarks in Civil Rights History series from Wiley. The second book was The Unfinished Agenda of the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. And in many ways, these two issues are linked together very closely. And certainly both of them are very pressing issues today.
Another question in the room, Dr. Byrne.
Yeah, I really liked your idea of using the data because schools, because it sort of matches with redlining, the way redlining occurs, and Raisin in the Sun, that play was kind of written around the redlining in the district and the school. So I think that's really important to bring in the school part.
Thank you. One of the things that I find really impressive about the kinds of tools that are being built today is that we're kind of moving out of a space of being able to say, well, I'm not a data person, or I'm not a legal person, or I'm not an education person. There's so many tools that are really intended for a broad section of people to just be well informed and well grounded. And what we find with our young learners at the college level is that they're in this generation where they want to be skeptical about the information that is being taught or told to them. And so putting tools, really good materials in their hands and asking them to dive and discover and provide their insights and their perspectives, having informed opinions, is going a long way with a lot of my students who would otherwise be able to just tell me, the sort of broad strokes of what Brown is, but not necessarily be able to have an intelligent or even a a social conversation about why it matters. Why does it matter today? And it's really difficult to build a network or a connecting point amongst people in a generation if we're not able to um, continue to uncover why something is relevant to us right now. And I find that the data piece, and certainly my liberal arts students get a real kick out of the data storytelling. And I will tell you that in the world of that they are going to inherit, those who are able to look at raw information and leverage it for insights, they get to be the decision makers and they get to write policies. They get to talk about what should be included in those policies. And so, what I'm finding is that by making use of some of these really accessible tools, and I am an English major, so I got to tell you, if I could poke around in a segregation explorer and I can make sense of what's happening in our world in data, that particular website, it is really easy for anybody. But what we're finding is that by putting it in the hands of students and letting them uncover and develop the insights, it's doing something really special for them to connect it to not why it matters overall, but why it matters to them, why it matters to any student, regardless of their racial background. And that part is going to be really important for the future in terms of continuing to do the important work of empathy and understanding. The more that our students are segregated in our schools, the less we have to think about, the less we should be thinking about what are we doing for particular groups of students, and but also thinking about what do we need to do for all of them. Brown matters to every student, every young learner. The condition of our schools is for everyone, regardless of the resources that you have available. And I think that the sort of data insights in any classroom allows a student, regardless of their experiences, to really see a picture and connect with a picture that they otherwise might not ever think about if they are attending schools with very little diversity.
So that's all the questions we have in our room. Joy, we'll hand it back to you.
All right. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat. I don't. I haven't received any questions in my email, so I think we are finished. But I will say thank you to you, Dr. Byrne, to everyone who has been attending our conference and who has hung out with us all week long. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We certainly hope that you have enjoyed this conference and that you have learned something, you have something to take away. Um, if you are an educator online and you still need and you're waiting for your credits, give us at least a week so we can pull everybody's names off of the different streams to get you your credit. But if you haven't heard from us in about a week and a half, reach out, and we'll get that information over to you. Otherwise, thank you all and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.